Richard Dawkins, who divides all beliefs into one of two categories. On the one hand, there is what he calls proper evidence-based belief. He says the only good reason to believe that something exists is if there's real evidence that it does. Ultimately, it always comes back to our senses, one way or another. And on the other hand, he says there is blind faith. Faith is, definition, believing in something where there literally isn't a scrap of evidence. If there were a scrap of evidence, then it wouldn't be faith, by definition.
Greetings and welcome there, people of YouTube. This is Essence of Forte, continuing with my dismantling of Peter S. Williams' lecture given at the University of Surrey. So we're continuing on from where we left off, now heading into the field of faith and how we, the atheists, apparently have it all wrong. A.C. Grayling agrees with Dawkins on this. He says faith involves deliberate ignoring of evidence, or commitment despite a lack of evidence. Well, I would say that although, of course, there are some religious people who exercise blind faith, as a matter of giving a definition of faith, the new atheists are clearly wrong about faith. And I suppose that you'll be following this up with a quote directly from the Bible. As C.S. Lewis put it, faith is the art of holding on to things your reason has once accepted in spite of your changing moods. And he said it's not a dichotomy between faith and reason, but rather faith exercised on the basis of reason, fighting against various temptations not to trust what you think you know is trustworthy. So then you should be fully capable of providing the same argument and reasoning that led you to your religion. The fact is, I've yet to meet a single theist who could do such a thing. Rather, their arguments rely on fallacies or factual inaccuracies. So, although you might think that religious people's faith is misplaced, as a matter of definition, it should be clear, and it's certainly clear within the mainstream biblical tradition, that faith is not automatically a blind faith, and that's certainly not the kind of faith that the Bible talks about. As Professor John Lennox from Oxford Uni, a philosopher of science, says, it's the new atheist concept of faith that is a delusion in the precise sense that they assign to the term, a persistent false belief held in the face of strong contradictory evidence. Against all the evidence, do they not even bother to consult dictionaries? They irrationally reduce all faith to blind faith and then subject it to ridicule. Wrong on both accounts of the dictionary and of the Bible. Firstly, the Oxford Dictionary would define faith as one of two things primarily. 1. A complete trust or confidence in someone or something, i.e., this restores one faith in politicians. 2. A strong belief in the doctrines of a religion, based on spiritual conviction rather than proof, i.e., bereaved people who have shown supreme faith. It is the latter that is used in the context of religion, hence its description. Thus I urge John C. Lennox to go back and check the dictionary for himself, rather than take his own word on faith, as his own word is wrong. But if you, by faith, mean trust, then please do state so to avoid the ambiguity of the English language. But not only is he, or you for that matter, wrong on the dictionary's definition of faith, but also the biblical usage of the word. On screen are 4 quotes from the Bible. Firstly, let me be clear that I do not accept the excuse of error in translation. The reasons for this include that it would be self-inflicted by God from Genesis chapter 11, the story of the Tower of Babel, and that I also trust an all-powerful, all-knowing God in being fully capable of ensuring a smooth transition process between printings. That is, unless you define translating a message as logically impossible.
Moving on from this, I must note that this is one of the areas that I picked you up during the Q&A. I gave you the dictionary definition first, and then went on to quote the Bible without acknowledging the fact that I was quoting the Bible until you stated that the Bible stated otherwise. I also didn't mention John chapter 20, verse 29 in this question, as I knew you believe to have some form of defense there, and if I can, I will take the most effective and direct route. Sadly, you drug it in, and I had to rise above said defences. Your defence of the story of Doubting Thomas was that it shows the very opposite to the concept of faith, even though Jesus does put tongue-in-cheek and brow bash Thomas for lacking said belief without reasonable evidence. The further problem with this is, Thomas had apparent experience of Christ's divinity and had shared in some of the miracles, and yet still doubted that Jesus could overcome death. The issue I raised from this fact was simple. If Jesus was willing to come before one of his followers who had personally met Jesus and witnessed some of the miracles due to him having doubt about Christ being able to overcome death, why was he unwilling to come before my younger self who had never met Jesus or witnessed his wonder and was at the time rapidly losing faith? Thomas had a greater advantage than I ever had, and yet Jesus gave him the time, but not to a teenager 2,000 years after these events. Here I touched on the problem of divine hiddenness. Your only response to this was that God gave justifiable reasons to believe, yet kept back enough so that if people did not want a relationship with him, they did not have to, i.e., that God remains hidden to preserve freedom of choice. From this, I raised a number of issues. Firstly, had God wished to remain hidden, then this is God's divine will. Therefore, your very existence at my university that night was an act against God's will, which is an act of heresy. I know this as later we will go on to discuss the cosmological argument, which is a piece of offensive apologetics, which actively fights for the existence of God, as opposed to defensive that merely keep the existence of God open. On top of this, I pointed out that merely knowing of another's existence does not force one to accept them. Keeping to a biblical narrative, I referenced the Pharaoh from Exodus and how, even though he had Moses proving the existence of the Hebrew God, he did not accept a relationship with him. We know he accepted the existence of said God following the plague of flies, i.e. the fourth plague. I also took this moment to inject some venom, pointing out the fact that following the plague of boils, the plague of locusts, the plague of darkness, and the warning of the plague on the firstborn, that the Bible states it was God who hardened the Pharaoh's heart. I compared this action to a bully forcing a smaller child onto the ground and punching him as he begs for his aggressor to stop, and yet they do not, for in the Bible's own words, so that my wonders may be multiplied. However, the Pharaoh rode out against the Hebrews like a kid bullied to the point of school shooting. He did not accept his aggressor, even though according to the Bible, God was a very real issue for him. The point was that your arguments had no basis either way. If God wished to remain hidden, then you are fighting his will and thus a heretic. As for your account on God needing to keep some doubt in order to form a relationship, biblical accounts contradict this statement. So we return to the idea of divine hiddenness and how I would expect an all-loving, all-knowing and all-powerful God of knowing being capable and lastly wanting to give me the right evidence to lead me to the conclusion of his existence. That's how relationships start. Someone says hi. As an ex-believer, I've tried and turns out got no response. I sought and I certainly did not find.
Not only are they wrong about faith, they're wrong about scientism, I would say. That the scientific demand that every rational belief, in order to qualify as being a rational belief, must be justified by evidence. That is a self-contradictory demand to make. For example, it can't be justified by evidence. What is the empirical evidence in support of the truth of the claim that you can only rationally know things via empirical evidence? It also entails an infinite regress that can't be satisfied. If a belief of mine is only going to be rational if I hold it on the basis of evidence, well then my belief in the evidence and my belief that the evidence supports my belief will only be rational if I have evidence for those beliefs. And those beliefs will only be rational if I have evidence for them. And so on. It generates an infinite regress that you cannot meet.
Hospitals, planes, geography, and crime forensics. Take your pick. The fact is, the system has been tested, and the system produces results. It works. The regress only exists in theory, but once you've tested the methodology, that's enough. We have enough evidence from this testing to be reasonably sure of its effectiveness.
This scientific demand is also, I would say, open to obvious counterexamples, such as moral knowledge or logical knowledge, which indeed one might say are kinds of knowledge one needs to have in order to even do science. Try doing science without relying upon the law of non-contradiction or modus ponens as a form of argumentation. To turn to Lewis again, he said, you cannot produce rational intuition by argument because argument depends upon rational intuition. Proof, in that sense, rests upon the unprovable that just has to be seen. Now, actually, there is one neo-atheist who I can bring to my defence at this point. I don't believe neo-atheists are wrong about everything. So Sam Harris, in The End of Faith, makes this point. He says, intuition denotes the most basic constituent of our faculty of understanding. The traditional opposition between reason and intuition is a false one. Reason is itself intuitive to the core, as any judgment that a proposition is reasonable or logical relies on intuition to find its feet. So they're wrong about faith, they're wrong about scientism on the other side of that coin.
The issue with this entire thing is it's trying to work top down and not bottom up. You should start with the mind that we do have, and from there work outwards towards a methodology. Working in this way, you will find that the regress issue you discuss does not exist, and you are merely dancing to the tune of theoretical issues. In all practicality, our mind does have the capacity for reason, and the use of this in the formation of science has had observable effects, in forming the very society we know today, in which our lifespans have vastly improved. Communication and transport has formed a global village, and we no longer have to hope and pray that the gods shall provide food, thanks to our always improving agricultural sciences. You also fail to make the basic distinction between questions of reality and questions of how to best explore said reality, i.e. conflate questions of reality with questions of epistemology. However, once humanity took that initial plunge and gave this crazy idea of empiricism a try, they found that the results were unprecedented. Yet even then, there were still further improvements to be made as philosophy explored deeper and deeper into this field until it finally left us with the modern field of science and evidentialism. The way in which it was given a trial run has in fact offered justification to the methodology, and through the methodology justification to the epistemology. This to date remains unmatched. If, however, you have an alternative method, e.g. following a book word for word which produces results as advanced as these, then we shall be deeply interested. Yet the Bible, along with all other holy texts, have not been able to rise to said challenge. So thank you all for watching. This is the end of the second segment of my series, and I hope you have enjoyed watching this one as well. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe if you haven't already. This is Essence of Thought. Take care and out.